It's been a crazy season so far in Survivor, but you're still alive. That's why you're watching this. This is the Scratching and Surviving show from the Sharp app, the most in-depth analysis you're going to find anywhere on Survivor pools. We are going to try to find our way and navigate through the treacherous landscape that is Week 4 in Survivor Pools NFL, coming up next on Scratching and Surviving. All right, guys. It is Scratching and Surviving. We did not do a lot of surviving last week in most pools. Circa, I got eliminated with Cincinnati on Monday night. Just a brutal performance by the Bengals. Could not stop Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commander offense. So I am out, as most people are. We are down to, let me look it up here, 642 people in Circa after having 14,266 start the pool. I mean, we have never seen anything like this. I've been playing Survivor pools for probably 30 years, and I have never seen anything like the start to this season. First 3 weeks, we just can't get one of the big favorites to win a game. Last week, the only teams that people may have had last week to advance were the Jets and Buffalo. Those were the two big teams that advanced, and those were not or teams that were taken by an overwhelming amount of people in pools. So the big teams, Cincinnati lost last week. San Francisco, not as big. They lost. The Browns in Circa was a big one. I didn't think the Browns would be taken as much as they were. I thought the Bucks would be the highest team in Circa. They were the third highest. 17.2% of people in Circa took the Bucks, and the Raiders, of course, another big one that we talked about last week. They went down. Now, if you follow me and really follow the Sharp app on TikTok, I did post something after this video. I posted this video on TikTok as well as YouTube. Posted something on TikTok where I kind of forgot to talk about it on the show. So if you get to TikTok, a lot of times I'll be able to give you guys updates on what I'm seeing, if big line moves, things like that. But last week, if you were in a small pool, you almost had to take Cincinnati in that pool, especially if you had a lot of people taking other teams. Now, you don't necessarily know in a lot of pools who other people are taking, but the nice thing about taking Cincinnati last week, it was the last game on Monday night. If you were in a small pool like I was down to a pool that was down to 12 people, and one person won with the Jets Thursday night. Everybody else lost who had taken a game on Sunday had lost, and it was down to me and one other person that it did not show who we had, but I just assumed it was probably Cincinnati. So I stuck with Cincinnati. And now you were able to make a hedge, not a big hedge. It's too early in the season, but I was able to hedge and just kind of get my money back on that pool. So no harm, no foul. It would have been nice to win the pot. It was a small pool, a couple of $1,000s. But the other option, there was another person that I was talking to asking me a question. They were down to, I believe it was 3 or 4 people, whatever the number was left in their pool, and somehow they were able to see who the other people had picked, and they were able to see this after the Sunday games. Now they asked me before going into the week who they should take, and I thought Cincinnati, again for those same reasons, was the team to take. Now what they did was somehow they were able to see and change. Now this is not going to happen in your pool, I don't think, how this person was able to see who the other person took, and claims that they weren't cheating, but somehow it was visible to them. They were able to see Buffalo. They were able to see the other team take Cincinnati, the other player take Cincinnati, and nobody else was left. So the fact that the other person was on Cincinnati, he moved to Buffalo, wound up being a good move, obviously not just because Buffalo won, but I had suggested that move. It was more than one, so there was like 2 or 3 other people had Cincinnati, and I forget how many other people had lost on Sunday, right? But the more people you had on Cincinnati, then the better the option was for you to pivot to Buffalo, right? And that's the threshold that you see on my spreadsheet is going to talk about that a bit, right? So the move was actually get off of Cincinnati there because you had pretty good equity. If you take Cincinnati and they lose, everyone gets back in the pool who got eliminated that week. If you pivot off of Buffalo, who was not as good a favorite, they were only a 4-point favorite, and that line was moving down, so I didn't really like it. But again, you just never know. The line moved in favor of Jacksonville, and then they just didn't even show up in that game. Buffalo wins the game. But just trying to teach you guys a little bit of the game theory there. and why I suggested to that person to move to Buffalo and why I did not move to Buffalo. Now, I didn't know who my opponent had. I assumed it was Cincinnati, but with one person already in the clubhouse with a winner with the Jets, it didn't make any sense. If I had two people and I wasn't sure who they took, I probably would have moved to Buffalo because I would have assumed that they took Cincinnati, and then the move would have been to get onto Buffalo. So, and then not hedge the game. You just kind of take Buffalo. That's sort of your hedge against Cincinnati, and obviously hope that the scenario that panned out on Monday night happens. But for me and my pool, stuck with Cincinnati, put a small hedge on it, and I was done. Circa, really not at any point where you could hedge in Circa, still aren't. So I just had to take my lumps on that one, and I'm out. But let's dive into week 4, see what we've got going on. Now, hedging is going to start becoming a bigger thing for more of you who are watching this. My suggestion on hedging, I like to hedge against the point spread. Some people like to take the money line. So if you had a New England this week, you're going to get a pretty hefty money line, right? If you took San Francisco and you want to take New England as a hedge, and then you could play a smaller amount. The advantage of hedging against the money line is we could play for a smaller amount of risk on the hedge because we're looking for a big payout. I think it's 3.5 to 1. I could look it up on the Sharp app here of what that line is right now. And let's just take a look. The best line that you could find right now on New England is at circa plus 450. Right, so you could take them on the money line at plus 450, or you could just go ahead and take the 10 points. I like taking the points because, like, if Cincinnati would have won that game late and not given up the touchdown, maybe they come down and score late and win that game, they would not have covered the 7.5. I would have won both bets, or, of course, the survivor pool is not necessarily a bet, but I would have won my bet and advanced in the survivor pool. Would have been down to 3 people left. My equity would have been about $670 or something like that in the pot. That would have been my equity. I would have hit my hedge bet, and then I could have been rolling here this week, maybe make another hedge, maybe not. But if you're hedging, I like doing that against the point spread because of the fact that I could catch a middle. I do have to risk a little bit more. Now, the other tricky part about hedging is if you hedge too soon, we've got a whole long season to go. Now, if you've got just a few people left in the pool, obviously you don't expect it to go all that many weeks. I've gone over the math here with you, but let's do simple math. Let's say you got a 70% chance to win every single one of the games left for you on the schedule. That's not going to happen. But this week we've got a team like San Francisco, 80% chance to win. You've got Kansas City with close to that 80% chance to win. Even at 80%, let's do the numbers there. All you're doing, if you had an 80% chance to win each and every week, which you're not, this is the first double-digit favorite we had, to win 2 weeks, to win with that team 2 weeks in a row is 64%. You're just going to multiply the 80% by 80%, right? So you get 64%. Then you multiply that again by 80%, so you come up with what, about 50%, right? So you're a 50-50 if you had 3 teams of minus 10 to pick in a row. And as we could see, we're not going to have that. So if you had that situation, you'd be at 50%. More than likely, you're going to be at the 70% range of teams you're going to pick. And you're a 50-50 on a 70% team after just 2 weeks to get to week 3 of doing this, right? And then it just keeps getting worse after that. You're down to 35% to win 3 times, right? You're down to 20, whatever it is, 23, 24% to win 4 times. So you're not a favorite just to get 4 weeks down the road, which is why survivor pools are so difficult, and you're often not going to be taking teams that are 70% chance. As a matter of fact, at some point, if you go deep enough, you're going to have to pick some of these teams that are only a 3-point favorite. So very difficult to advance. It's been even crazier this year, but consider the hedging opportunities. And then for your specific pool, of course, always message me down below with questions on how you're going to, if you're thinking about hedging and how you want to go about it. I'll kind of throw my input in there, but we could play with the numbers all we want. You have to have a little bit of a feel for it as well. Again, you don't want to overdo it, but if you're going to hedge, we want to hedge for a relatively safe amount because, again, remember, if you hedge and lose, now you're down your entry fee and the hedge. And ultimately, we're trying to get that back. So the more we lose with the hedge bets, okay, it's great. We're advancing in the pool. But if everyone else is advancing with us and we're not picking up equity, we're just adding to the amount that we're down here for this particular pool. So you got to be careful about that. So hit me up in the messages down below, comments, whether this is YouTube or TikTok, and I'll be happy to answer all of your hedging questions. Let's dive into the Survivor Grid. Take a look at what we've got going on this week. Now, San Francisco, we alluded to it. They're the big favorite this week. This is the first double-digit favorite we've seen so far this season. We'll see if they can hold on and win. as the largest favorite on the board. Has not happened yet in the first few weeks. San Francisco, you could see, has a lot of future value. Now, the option we were looking at, and sorry if you hear my Alexa going off, we've got a hurricane coming here in just a few hours here to Florida, so I want to get this video out to you guys before then, but I'm getting a ton of updates from the National Weather Advisory. But we've got San Francisco as the big favorite this week. We talked about maybe the line that we were looking at last week with Cincinnati. We thought the next 3 weeks would be, the optimal line was Cincinnati, then the Jets, and then San Francisco in week 5. That sort of looked, if you're just strictly playing it from trying to find the optimal amount of taking the optimal favorites for the next 3 weeks, starting with last week, that would have been it. Already, of course, that was blown with Cincinnati losing that game. And this Arizona line, San Francisco, Arizona, has come down with the injuries to San Francisco, with San Francisco losing last week. All right, but you're going to see now 33%, a third of pools here are taking San Francisco, because I think a lot of people are afraid of this Arizona game. Now, a way to differentiate yourself if you want to do that, certainly in larger pools, is going to be to take one of these other teams. Now, circa Kansas City, a lot of people are going to save Kansas City because you could use them, I believe, on both holidays. If you're not familiar with the circa rules, you must pick, as if it was a different week, Thanksgiving games, and this year also Black Friday, as well as the Christmas games this year. You can take you have to pick a team from those days. And we've seen some strategy come into play, and we'll talk about that as we get closer, where sometimes it's advantageous to not take one of the big favorites. And the way this pool is going this year, there may not be all that many people who survive circa all the way to Thanksgiving, and then you could play a little game theory with maybe taking an underdog or a team that no one's going to take. But we'll get into that more. But a lot of people are going to be saving Kansas City in that format. In your pool, more than likely, you don't necessarily need to save Kansas City for those weeks. But as you can see on Survivor Grid, you're going to have a lot of opportunities. Now, New Orleans, a lot of people are going to be afraid of that game. I'm not all that confident in that game either. Do we like them at the Chargers on the road this week? Only 7.6% of pools taking them because of the future value on Kansas City. Now, a ton of future value on San Francisco, but people are going to pull the trigger here as the 10-point favorite and take them. Now, the Jets, a lot of people may have advanced in your pool by taking the Jets last week. If that's the case, you got to look at your pool individually. You're down to just a few people in the pool. Maybe no one could take the Jets. That would be a good opportunity for you to go ahead and take the Jets. I know Denver's coming off a win. 7.5-point favorites this week. The Jets are at home. You got to, again, I could kind of give you guys the overview of all pools, but you've got to hit me with the comments down below so we get a better feel for your pool and exactly how we should be tackling your pool. Now, Houston, home against Jacksonville. We've seen how poor Jacksonville has played. They are getting some play here, 12%. And then the future value of Jacksonville, you've got them at New England, or Houston, that is, at New England in Week 6. I mean, Week 6, how's this week shaping up? You've got Baltimore, which probably a lot of people could still take Baltimore because they knocked so many people out a couple of weeks ago. San Francisco at Seattle, don't think a lot of people are going to really love that game. Cincinnati's at the Giants. We've seen how poor Cincinnati's played. I mean, it's just a very, very difficult year to even look 2 weeks out and know what to expect, where we're going to have these big lines. Green Bay's home for Arizona. Sure, none of these games are really standing out for us here. Outside, I would say Baltimore looks pretty good against Washington, but we've seen Baltimore lose as well. Right, so these are the big teams this week. Dallas at the Giants getting 13%. Cincinnati at Carolina. Some people are taking that game as well. But let's dive into the spreadsheet and see if we can get a different picture here. So I've got it weighted for 0%. And as always, that's going to pick the two biggest favorites, which are San Francisco, Kansas City. If you're in a small pool, I mean, we've got to start thinking about this. If you're in a small pool, as I always say, I want to kind of stick to the chalkiest picks I can in small pools. It didn't work last week, but again, if the pool was small enough, the fact that you got Cincinnati on the last game of the slate, at least you were able to maybe put a hedge in on that. We don't have that situation this week. The Monday night games are all tight. I just looked at it before, but let me bring it back up. So you've got the Seattle-Detroit game. Probably not a game that you're going to be targeting here in Survivor, and Tennessee-Miami is also not another game you're probably going to want to take. Buffalo-Baltimore is the Sunday night game. So those three games are not games that were necessarily going to be factors in Survivor pools, but the afternoon games, the 4 o'clock games, look to be some of the games. San Francisco is playing at 4 o'clock. This Kansas City game is at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Those are probably going to be the most looked at games, most taken games. Even the Jets are home, so that's going to be a 1 o'clock game, I believe, I'm sure. The Jets are at home at 1 o'clock, so that'll be another game that people take. So we'll look at that as far as hedging and whatnot. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to do this week than it was last week. But depending on your pool, again, drop me down a comment. We'll talk about it. So San Francisco, you could see, and Kansas City, because they're the two favorites, they're clearly getting the favorite options here in small pools at a 0% future value. If we move this up to 25%, doesn't really change things all that much. Why? Because these teams are such big favorites this week. So it's kind of keeping everything where we have it. So, again, San Francisco just shows up as a really good option, even though the future value is not there. Now, again, in a small pool, we don't really care all that much about future value. We just bump it up to 50%. That's where Houston comes in, because Houston does not have as much of the future value. Also, the Jets, which aren't as high in future value. So we're kind of getting away from Kansas City, but we still like San Francisco. This is why San Francisco is getting 33%. All right, we still like San Francisco as a 10-point favorite this week in these pools, especially small pools. Now, the only way I would really get off of San Francisco is in a larger pool. Maybe I'm going to take a Houston as a play to get a little different in a large pool. Even if I was in Circa, I'm looking at this from my point of view. I really thought, for me, the Jets were going to be my pick, and I think that's where I would still go, is take the Jets this week in Circa. But I could see why some people would want to take Houston for that same reason. We didn't talk about the threshold column here, and what you're seeing from the threshold is this is based on two factors. It's based on what's the probability this team wins and how many people are taking them. And this is going to be in play more and more as we get down to a small amount of people in your pool. What this is basically saying, here we're projecting 33% of all pools, but if you're in a pool with just 5 people left, right, and none of them have taken San Francisco to this point, and you think that the other, let's say 3 of the 5, you're one of the 5, right? So 3 of the other 4. So you think that 3 of 5, which is 60%, are going to be on San Francisco. Well, now a fade is just about any one of these favorites, right? All these teams that are 65% or better, that's what this threshold number is telling you. So if you knew that 3 people were taking San Francisco, you'd definitely want to get off of San Francisco and get yourself on probably Kansas City, which most people aren't going to be taking. Okay? And take advantage of the fact that in these small pools, this happened in my pool last week, where people were taking some teams that they just should not have taken. If you lose with Cincinnati, like I did, so be it. I lost with the biggest favorite of the entire weekend. That's going to happen. But to lose on a team that's marginally favored because you're trying to differentiate yourself when a pool is down to 10 people, 15 people, 8 people, whatever it is, to try to differentiate yourself is silly. Let these other people make the suboptimal plays. You're going to take an optimal play. Now, if everyone is playing the optimal, which would be San Francisco, that's when you can shift to someone else. But you've got to be confident that you're getting, let's say, 3 out of 5 here taking San Francisco, right? 60% of the pool. Then you can move off of it. But if we go back to, and I don't want to screw up my formulas here, so we'll just go back. If you go back to typical pools, we're getting about 33. Let's say, call it 35% on San Francisco. But again, small pools, it's just like other statistics that you're going to run. When we have a small sample size, it's not always going to pan out exactly how we're looking at it in Survivor Grid. So Kansas City not getting as much action. That's why you're going to get 77%, which is basically saying at this ownership, the only way you should be fading Kansas City, not taking future value into account, is by taking San Francisco. All right, so we could change these numbers based on the higher these numbers go as far as pick percentage, the weaker the team is that you could take as far as a fade. All right, so look at your pool. A lot of people may have taken the Jets last week and then can't take the Jets, right? So this 17% number may be even lower. If you can take the Jets, this would be advantageous maybe to take the Jets. You've got the 3 other people in your pool. You're down to 4. 3 other people in your pool took the Jets last week. That's how they survived. Well, then you're probably going to want to take the Jets to kind of differentiate yourself here, because what we're doing, we're trying to find the optimal in a small pool. I want to go back to Survivor Grid, right? So we're trying to be optimal and play a little bit of game theory at the same time, right? So we don't want to go down to taking Arizona as a 3.5-point favorite when we can accomplish the same thing maybe by taking the Jets. I get these questions a lot, Would you take last week? Someone asked me, would you take Pittsburgh if Herbert doesn't play? And I said, what's your reasoning for taking Pittsburgh? If it's to differentiate yourself, there were other ways to differentiate yourself. You could have taken the Jets, right? Suppose, of course, that Thursday night game passed you by. You couldn't take it anymore. There were other teams that you could have played that had a higher, San Francisco, which a lot of people weren't playing. Granted, they lost that game. I get it. But, Buffalo, which was at that point a higher favorite. Some of these other teams that you could have differentiated yourself, gotten off of a pick that everyone else is taking and not taken as much risk. So especially in small pools, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do that. So let the other participants in your pool make those kind of mistakes. I would stay as chalky as I possibly could with the pool. So let's go back here to the spreadsheet and just look at it from 100% future value here. And then you see it kind of gets off of San Francisco and Kansas City completely. And we're looking at teams like Houston and like Arizona, which I just mentioned Arizona, because Arizona has such little future value. I'd still be very hesitant to take in Arizona. I'd be much more inclined to maybe take a Houston in a larger pool. If we go back to Survivor Grid, let's see the opportunities here that we have to take Houston in upcoming weeks. I mean, it's very limited. Buffalo, at New England, at Green Bay, home for Indianapolis, at the Jets, Detroit, at Dallas, and then home for Tennessee in Week 12. So, I mean, it's limited on when you're going to want to take them. And as we've seen in this league, between injuries and everything else, looking out to Week 12 is kind of a fool's game. So I don't mind getting on Houston here if I was in a very large pool, even in Circa. Houston's not a terrible play. I think I would take my chances with the Jets in that pool if I were still alive. In smaller pools, right now, if I won with Cincinnati, I'd be firing away at San Francisco. Let these other guys, I would be down to 3 in that pool, and I would hope someone got off of San Francisco. But again, the game theory was if we had 3 in the pool, right, and someone gets off San Francisco and does it with Kansas City, they would actually be really smart. So it's really hard to figure out exactly which way you would go unless you know where your opponents are going. But I'd have to look, and I haven't looked necessarily at that pool. If one of my 2 opponents had taken San Francisco, then perhaps it would be a more advantageous play to play San Francisco. So you're going to have to tell me all that information. Who have your opponents taken? How many people are left in your pool? All that information down below, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. So again, guys, I appreciate you guys subscribing. We've gotten a ton of subscriptions from these videos, and that's thanks to you guys. I really appreciate it. And a lot of likes. And you guys, of course, keep swarming me with the comments. I love that as well. Maybe slow to answer. Who knows if we're going to have power here in the Tampa area coming in the next few hours, but I'll do the best I can for you guys. And as always, I hope to see you next week surviving again. Good luck, guys.